Seeking English S.A.T. Workbook, page 407, problem 1. No calculator, and they are doing you a big favor by deterring you from trying to use the calculator on this problem because those data points there, I think they're unclear enough that if you tried to use them literally, it would be a great disadvantage to you in getting to any of the answers in the correct amount of time. I'm not going to put the graph on the screen for reasons I've already explained, and if you can see the graph, you can imagine why I'm not going to try to put it on the board. So sorry about that. I will explain the graph well enough to make the points that I need to make in this video about what to do and what not to do in this kind of problem. It says, during which of the following periods did the ratio of private debt to government debt increase the most? And your choices are 1965 to 1975, 1985 to 1995, 1995 to 2005, and 2005 to 2015. Now, depending on how you think you would calculate ratios, this becomes a more complicated problem. That black line down near the bottom is not flat. So those tiny little ups and downs in the black line are actually doubling and halving the government debt figure. Okay, think about that for a second, because it's not going to be important, and I want to stress that once you understand it, you should understand why it is not going to be important, and don't get sucked into the idea that it's important on the test. Okay, that black line can confuse you a lot if you treat it as if there is time to treat it as important. So this is a very convoluted and complicated explanation for why something is not convoluted and complicated in practical terms on the test, but it is worth it. It is worth it. I want to make sure that you do not overthink this on the real test. Think of it this way. The test designers assume that for an average problem, for an average student in an average amount of time, it's more likely to be correct than to be incorrect. Okay, so assume that if I'm an average student and I spend an average amount of time on this problem, my chances of getting it correct are greater than half. For that to be true, you would have to solve the problem by comparatively simple means. You would have to read the graph in a very unsophisticated way. And so that is what they are sort of demanding of you in this problem. So let's take a look at it. Options 1965 through 1975. At 1965 and 1975, these things are equal. Okay. Then 1975, private debt has gone up and government debt has gone down. And by how much exactly? Don't calculate. You're not supposed to calculate with a calculator. And so pretending that you will have time to do that is pretending that that's how they want you to solve the problem. Don't do it. Yes, I am going to over-explain this. Okay, 1985 to 1995. Government debt is comparatively small. It's down, kind of average for the whole black line there. And the private debt has gone up some more. Okay, and in 1995, government debt is very slightly larger, but for visual purposes, it might as well be the same. Private debt has increased. It is not doubled, but something near that, something closer to that than not. Okay, 1995 to 2005. 1995, I've described that. What happens between 1995 and 2005? Government debt goes way down. It goes way down. So it looks like it becomes less than half of what it was. Doesn't matter? Yeah, it matters. And private debt is there at its steepest total point for any of these segments given, and that does matter. Okay, 2005 to 2015. Government debt slightly increased. It came up to something like the previous level in 1995. Private debt has gone up, but then it comes down. So the total slope for that period is not as steep as that initial slope for that period. it has begun to flatten out a little bit. So the clumsy way of reading this, which is what you will probably have to use in order to get the answer that the test designers assume that you will get, is this. At what point is private debt going up steeply while government debt is going down at all? What is it, 65 through 75? No, government debt is declining at the kind of almost flat level that the graph shows. Private debt is sloping up at kind of the same rate. 85 through 95, government debt remains almost the same, and there's a substantial increase for the private debt, but it is not as steep as in the next section, 1995 to 2005. As I said before, this is continuous increase, and it is the steepest. Part of the private debt increase, while government debt decreases. 2005 to 2015, government debt increases, which is the opposite of what you would expect, and even without considering that decline in private debt at the top, even if you just drew a line from the first point to the last point and ignored that middle point there, it would not be as steep as in the previous part. So the simple answer is that between 1995 and 2005, there's a continuous increase in private debt, which is a steep line, and there is a continuous drop in government debt, which is it's as steep as any of those declining lines in the black line. So just looking at it graphically, your eyes should tell you, yeah, that's the correct answer. If you took it apart mathematically, there are various ways to make the case that maybe that's not really true based on what happens. Okay, depending on what you think is, it says ratio increase or decrease the most. The question is that on an arithmetic scale, or is that on an exponential scale? It depends on what scale of increase or decrease you're using to make your comparisons. Don't do that. That's a much more complex problem, and they do not expect that from you on the S.A.T. That's more of a GRE, GMAT kind of problem. And this is not that test, so don't treat it as if it is that test.